and welcome back. We are here today to talk about some very important things that you will want to know about your licensing, about becoming a licensed nurse. What exactly does that even mean? Well, we are going to spend some time talking about the Board of Nursing today and exactly where the regulation of our nursing practice comes from. Okay? And so we'll just kind of start out by talking about the Hawaii Board of Nursing. And what you need to know is that it falls under the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs. Our patients are consumers. And it is the Professional and Vocational Licensing Division, meaning that it's where professional individuals like nurses, like registered nurses and practical nurses, get their licensure. It is from a board that makes that determination. So this Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs is actually an overseer of all the things that you see here, things that people are consumers of, and that includes healthcare. Okay? So the Board of Nursing is one of the 47 boards that are under the PVL. And the board has 9 members. The members are appointed by the governor of the state of Hawaii. And 6 of them are registered nurses. And one of those is an advanced practice registered nurse. One is a licensed practical nurse. And 2 of them are public members. So in other words, not only are there licensed nurses on the board, different types of licensures, right? RNs, LPNs, advanced practice nurses, and then 2 members of the public representing just the public at large or the community. The term of office for the members that are on the board is about 3 years. So the governor will appoint you, and then you may serve on the board for a 3-year period. You can't serve more than 2 consecutive terms, and 6 members of the board must be residents of the city and county of Honolulu, and 3 shall be residents of counties other than the city and county of Honolulu. So there has to be a nurse from Maui County. There has to be nurses from other counties as well, so that all of the islands are hopefully represented. And what the Board of Nursing does is define the scope and practice of nursing and the delegation of nursing tasks. That's one of the things that the board does. So defining scope of practice means they kind of outline what it is that we as nurses are allowed to do. They also prescribe standards for preparing nurses. So what that means is they approve educational programs like the one that you are in. We must meet the requirements of the Board of Nursing in order to be able to teach you nursing. And once we say you have completed the curriculum, we send them a letter saying that so-and-so has completed the LPN program at UH Maui College, and then your transcripts get sent over, and then the board takes the transcripts and takes the letter from us saying that you've completed all the work, and then you are allowed to have what is called an authorization to test, meaning that you will then sit down for your licensure exam, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So the Board of Nursing actually prescribes the standards for nursing education. They tell us how many credits you're supposed to be in class for. Really what they do is they kind of differentiate the types of subject matter that needs to be in the nursing program, biological sciences, social sciences. They tell us that a certain percentage of the time that you spend in nursing school needs to be spent in the laboratory setting and in the clinical setting. So these are all things that are prescribed by the Board of Nursing. They can also deny or withdraw approval of an educational program for failure to meet or maintain the standards that are prescribed by the board. And then we mentioned before that they license LPNs, RNs, and advanced practice RNs. They license qualified applicants as well by something called examination, which is what you'll do. You'll get licensed in the state of Hawaii by examination, or endorsement. And the word your book uses for this is reciprocity. And so when I moved here from Ohio a very long time ago, I had a license in Ohio. And when I came to Hawaii, I put in for a temporary license, which I had within about 2 weeks by the Board of Nursing in Hawaii. And they said you have a temporary license by endorsement. In other words, because you're licensed in the state of Hawaii, because you're licensed in the state of Ohio, you are also licensed here in the state of Hawaii after 2 weeks. It was kind of like, back in that time, it was temporary, and then my license in the state of Hawaii became permanent. But I did not need to retake the board exam, and that is called licensure through endorsement. Okay. The other thing that the board can do is to renew our licenses. So we have to have our licenses renewed every 2 years, reinstate a license, and restore licenses and recognitions. So what that means in terms of restoring a license is they oversee all the licensed nurses in Hawaii. So they conduct hearings upon request of a denied applicant, or upon charges calling for discipline of a licensee. So in other words, if somebody calls and complains about you and your practice as a nurse, it is the Board of Nursing that forms a committee, and they will conduct a hearing to look at all of the evidence and make a decision based of whether you'll be having disciplinary action against your license or not. So that is another Board of Nursing duty. They also, like we said, authorize the administration of examinations to eligible applicants for licensure. And so you will take the PN NCLEX exam when you complete the curriculum in this program. And after successful examination, you will become licensed. You will become a licensed practical nurse. The other thing that the Board of Nursing does is develop and adopt rules as necessary relating to the practice of nursing in telehealth. So when new things come about, it is kind of the Board of Nursing's responsibility to look into what the trends are, what are the best practices, what is happening across the United States for these types of practices, and then to bring whatever that is here to Hawaii as well. So we know that during COVID, telehealth has become extremely popular way of attaining health care, and this is when you have a visit with your healthcare provider over a computer. It's not exactly a Zoom session. Usually it's done through a much more secure type of environment, but it is an opportunity for you to meet with a physician, an advanced practice nurse, or an RN to have a visit. And we can see here there's a nurse on one of these images meeting with a patient. We can see that the patient's vital signs are being measured, and the nurse is talking to the person, and the person is explaining what the problems are that they are having. In the image below, we can see a physician having a telehealth appointment with a baby. And so it looks like this is a rural physician who's having a kind of a consult with doctors that are in a higher level of practice. So like maybe he is just a family practice pediatric doc out in the country, and he's got a little baby that needs a little more attention and advice, or a consult with physicians that are maybe at the big university hospital that's several hours away. And so you can see he's got the baby there, they can see the baby on the screen, and you can see the two medical professionals that he is consulting with. So this is really an amazing new way now that we're able to provide care, telehealth. And the Board of Nursing helps put those rules into place. They also monitor and evaluate the scope of practice of nursing, like I said, in other states, and they make recommendations to our legislators to amend certain definitions under our Nurse Practice Act. And so I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of when this happens. So for example, in 2009, the governor, it was Linda Lingle at the time, she signed a prescriptive authority bill for advanced practice nurses to be able to have prescribing rights in the state of Hawaii. So what happened was advanced practice nurses all across the states were getting more independent in their ability to provide care. They were getting the authority to write prescriptions for patients in different settings based on their specialty. And eventually it came here to Hawaii. Our Board of Nursing kind of looked out at what was going on, brought this to the attention of our legislators, and then we got a bill signed into law that would allow advanced practice nurses to write prescriptions. So this is an example of how that happens. So the Board of Nursing actually communicates with like national organizations. So our board here in Hawaii reaches out to what we call the National Council of State Boards of Nursing, right? So there's this overarching National Council of State Boards. And then each of all the different states have their own Board of Nursing, right? And so they communicate with this national board to find out different ways that we're improving the legal and ethical standards of practice in nursing for protection of the public health, safety, and welfare. And so the NCSBN, as they are known, actually outlines the scope of practice for all the nurses based on this Nurse Practice Act. So we'll talk a little bit now about what the Nurse Practice Act is. So this National Council kind of puts forward this Nurse Practice Act, and then it kind of gets adopted by our Board of Nursing. And so what the Nurse Practice Act says is it defines the scope of practice. It authorizes the board to oversee the nursing practice in your state, and it kind of outlines what constitutes grounds for disciplinary action against a nurse, right? So that, and the reason for this is so that all the different states are pretty much in line with each other, right? So each state has the right to make their own laws where nursing is concerned. However, it's kind of nice to have this National Council's Nurse Practice Act, because then the states have something to look to and adopt and kind of utilize for our Nurse Practice Act. And so we're going to talk for a minute about what a statute even is, right? So if we're going to talk about a statute, I think we should probably define what it is. A statute is a written, formal kind of enactment of a legislative authority that governs a state, city, or county. So typically a statute will either command or prohibit something or declare some kind of policy, all right? And so it's often used to distinguish law made by legislative bodies from case law decided by the courts, right? So there's one thing, it's one thing if we go to court and we're arguing a case in front of a judge, right? But what we need to have for nursing things that are called statutes, which means that, you know, we have this primary authority. It's written into law that says who we are and what we do. That's a statute. And so the Hawaii Revised Statutes, Division 2, Title 25, Chapter 457 relates to nurses. And that's where it comes from. So if you put that into Google, it will take you to where our statutes are concerning our practice. And it's very much modeled after the NCSBN's Nurse Practice Act. And so what does it say about practical nurses? A licensed practical nurse, this is the scope of practice as defined by the Nurse Practice Act. You are to collect data and conduct focused nursing assessments on patients, right? You are to participate with other healthcare providers in developing and modifying care for patients, plans of care, implementing nursing interventions within a patient-centered plan of care. Nursing interventions means that we are doing something to help the patient, right? Like assisting the patient with feeding, giving the patient their medications, changing a dressing on a wound. These are all interventions that nurses perform. And then assisting in the evaluation of the responses of those interventions. So if I give a patient a blood pressure medication, I help evaluate whether or not that medication actually helped their blood pressure go down. How would I do that? By checking their blood pressure before I give them the medication, documenting their blood pressure, giving them the medication, waiting until I know that the medication has taken effect, and then rechecking their blood pressure. So this is an example of how we evaluate a response to a nursing intervention. Other things that LPNs have in their scope of practice is to provide for the maintenance of safe and effective nursing care. And it says rendered directly or indirectly. And what that means is we are responsible for providing safe care, even if we're delegating that care to an unlicensed assistive personnel, which would be like a nursing assistant or a transporter in the hospital or a psych tech or a med tech in the clinical setting. We are to advocate the best interest of our patients. We are to communicate and collaborate with patients and other members of the healthcare team. And we are to provide healthcare information to our patients. So those are some of the listings of behaviors that are appropriate for a licensed practical nurse as stated in the Nurse Practice Act. And so that is all we are going to cover for this lecture today. I want you to make sure that you go back and kind of understand the difference between the Board of Nursing, the National Council of State Boards of Nursing, and the Nurse Practice Act. And we are going to talk more about nursing law next time.